Welcome. In this video, we'll be factoring trinomials of the form ax squared plus bx plus c, specifically when a is not equal to 1. To do this, we'll use the AC method. Step 1 will be to multiply a times c, and then we're going to look for two integers, m and n, whose product is ac and whose sum is b. Next, we'll rewrite ax squared plus bx plus c, specifically rewriting bx and splitting bx into two separate terms using our two numbers m and n. That will create a four-term polynomial, which we can then factor by grouping, and then finally we can check. In this example, notice that a is 8 and c is -3. So ac is -24. 8 times -3 is -24. We're looking for two integers that multiply to -24 and add to 2. It might take a little practice. You may have to list the different pairs of numbers if you need to, but eventually, with enough practice, you'll get there. Let's use 6 and -4. Their product is -24 and their sum is +2. So we're going to rewrite this trinomial, but instead of writing 2x, we're going to replace the 2x with 6x and -4x. 8x squared plus 6x minus 4x minus 3. Notice that 2x has been split into two separate terms, 6x minus 4x. And it doesn't matter the order that you put these in, that's up to you. Look at the first two terms and only the first two terms. What do they have in common? What is their greatest common factor? 2x. When we factor out the 2x, we're left with 4x plus 3. And then we'll focus on the last two terms and only the last two terms. Look for their greatest common factor. It looks at first like they don't have anything in common, but since the leading coefficient on the first term here is negative, we'll factor out a negative sign. So we'll just pull out a -1, leaving us with 4x plus 3. Notice now that those two parentheses are identical. That's a good indication that we're doing something correct. So we're going to refactor. The greatest common factor now is 4x plus 3. And when we factor out the 4x plus 3, we're going to be left with 2x minus 1. And now we have factored the original trinomial. If you want, you can distribute that out and make sure that once you combine like terms, we get what we started with. It's always a good idea to check if you have time. In this example, a times c, again, is -24. That's just coincidental. This time we want the two numbers to add to -2. So we need to find two numbers that multiply to -24 and add to -2. Those two numbers are -6 and +4. Again, double check. -6 times 4 is -24. -6 plus 4 will give us -2. So we're going to rewrite the original trinomial, splitting apart the -2x. Instead of -2x, we'll write it as -6x plus 4x minus 8. From here, factor by grouping. Look at those first two terms. Factor out their greatest common factor, which is 3x. Then we'll be left with x minus 2. And then focus on the last two terms. Their greatest common factor is 4. Factor out a 4 and we're left with x minus 2. Notice now the parentheses in each case is the same. That's a good indication. Let's factor it out. X minus 2. When we factor out x minus 2, you have 3x and 4 left over. So we have 3x plus 4 in the second set of parentheses. And now we've finished factoring the trinomial. Up next, a times c this time is negative 15. We want two numbers, two integers, whose product is negative 15 and whose sum is positive 2. Think about that for a minute, and it looks like 5 and negative 3 will work. They multiply to give us negative 15, they add to give us positive 2. So we'll rewrite the original trinomial, 5x squared plus 5x minus 3x minus 3. Factor by grouping. Look at the first two terms. They have a 5 and an x in common. Once we factor out the 5x, we're left with x plus 1. Look at the last two terms. Their greatest common factor is 3, and since the leading coefficient is negative, we'll pull out a negative 3. Factor out that negative 3, and we're left with x plus 1. Notice the parentheses are identical. That's good. We'll factor out that set of parentheses, leaving us with 5x minus 3. In this example, notice that a is negative to begin with. When we have this situation, I like to factor out a negative sign. That's going to help us later. So factoring a negative out is just going to change all the signs inside of our brackets here. And from here, we can use AC. A times C, 4 times negative 3 is negative 12. We want two numbers whose product is negative 12 and whose sum is negative 11. Those two numbers will be negative 12 and 1. They multiply to negative 12, they add to negative 11. So we're going to rewrite this trinomial using 4 terms. Keep in mind that that negative is still out front. So we have 4x squared, replace 11x or negative 11x with negative 12 and 1. So we have negative 12x plus 1x minus 3. Continue the factor by grouping process. Look at the first two terms and factor out the GCF of just those two terms. Keep in mind that there is a negative still out front. So the GCF of 4 and 12 is 4. We also have an x in common. So we're left with x minus 3. Look at the last two. They have nothing in common other than a 1. So we'll just factor out a 1, leaving us with x minus 3. Notice the parentheses are the same. That's good. So we'll factor out the parentheses, keeping in mind that there's a negative still out front. And when you factor out the parentheses, you're left with the 4x and the 1 in the second set of parentheses. And now we've fully factored our trinomial. Notice in this example that 6, 32, and 24 all have a 2 in common. That's the greatest common factor that we want to factor out at the beginning, similar to how we factored out a negative at the beginning of the previous example. So we'll factor out that GCF of 2, leaving us with 3x squared plus 16x minus 12. Now we can look at A times C. C is negative 36. Two integers that multiply to negative 36 and add to 16 will be 18 and negative 2. Next, we'll rewrite that trinomial. We have 2 times 3x squared, replace 16x with 18x minus 2x. Then bring down the negative 12. Factor by grouping. Looking at the first two terms, let's factor out their greatest common factor. Keep in mind that 2 is out front. 3 and 18 have a 3 in common and an x in common. So we have x plus 6 left over. Looking at the second set of parentheses, we have a 2 in common, and since the leading number is negative, we'll pull out a -2. And we're left with x plus 6. Notice again that the parentheses there are the same. That's a good thing. We want them to be the same. So we still have a 2 out front. We're going to factor out the x plus 6, and that leaves us with the 3x minus 2 in the second set of parentheses. And now we have fully factored the trinomial. Thanks for watching.